Call to order the meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission, held tonight on March 14th in the Great Hall in Plymouth. This meeting is hybrid, meaning it's in person as well as via a Zoom webinar, and can be viewed live on the local government channel 15 and 47 Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission, going to the town website. Zoom attendees, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. And the in-person audience, for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. The first item on the agenda tonight will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the States of the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Tonight, I want to start off by reading a statement into the record, which is basically a brief report of where we are in this two-year mission to prepare a new charter for Plymouth, and how our votes last week fit into this process. As you know, this saga started with the filing of petitions with the town clerk early last year that call for a charter commission to be formed and 9 persons to be elected as commissioners. There were 21 candidates and a vigorous campaign of the various candidates issuing public statements, making presentations, and engaging in election debates and PAC TV, other public forums. By the time of the election last May 15th, these 21 candidates had made their beliefs known and how they felt about our current form of government, and suggested ways to improve upon it. 9 were elected on May 15th, and I think it's fair to say that the positions of these 9 were well known by then. Several elected commissioners expressed their initial thinking when the commission organized shortly after the election. There was no mystery where they stood in the various forms of local government, whether it be mayor form or council form with no town meeting, or town meeting with a strong town manager and a select board. Yes, elections do have consequences, but nevertheless, all 9 newly elected commissioners vowed they would have an open mind, everything and anything were on the table, and would listen to any and every person willing to come before us with his or her ideas on how to improve upon our town government. Over the next 10 months after the election, roughly every 2 weeks, this commission invited in or welcomed by Zoom individuals from all over Plymouth who told us their ideas, including officials from Plymouth and also officials from other towns deeply involved in their local governments. Many of them we interrogated at length, and we debated the wide assortment of issues involving local government. We studied over 30 charters of the other large towns in Massachusetts. We invited in person or by Zoom town officials from Sharon, Amherst, Somerville, Brookline, Barnstable, Fairhaven, and others. And we consulted all available public documents regarding local government and the writing of charters. As I think everyone knows by now, this entire process of allowing a town to draft its own charter is closely governed by Massachusetts state law, in this case by Chapter 43B, which consists of 20 sections spread over 30 pages of the Massachusetts general laws. Every aspect of the process is covered, from the initial passage of the townwide vote calling for a charter commission, how the commission is to operate with mandatory hearings, deadlines for filing preliminary drafts and final reports, and then the final charter and how to get it on the ballot 2 years when we started. In this case, it'll be May 20th, 2023, on the townwide ballot. And then what it takes in quantum of vote to be adopted and to go into effect. Now, we've been following closely the process laid out in this state statute. Importantly, the town meeting has no role to play in the process, and neither does any other official or board or committee in Plymouth, elected or appointed, except for the Select Board, which has two functions. It places the initial question on the town ballot of whether to have a charter commission or not, a yes or no vote. And then at the end of the 2-year process, places the question of whether or not to adopt the commission's drafted charter or not, again, a yes or no vote. That's it. Even the wording of these two ballot questions is spelled out word by word in Chapter 43B. Everything else and how we operate is left up to the commission, whose job is to follow the statute to the letter. Chapter 43B goes to such extraordinary lengths to detail the process so that the Charter Commission can operate without interference or influence of any other board or committee or official other than the Massachusetts Attorney General, who must approve the final charter that we draft as being consistent and not in violation of any preemptive state statute. So where are we now in this process? We've now accumulated a large amount of information, ideas of what kind of government would work in Plymouth. And it's time for us to get down to specifics and start drafting the charter, which we must have in preliminary form 6 months from now, by September 15th, 2022. So last week, we took 2 votes and then a third vote. These votes are not the be-all and end-all, and anyone can make a motion at any time, which could have the effect of rescinding an earlier vote. We are working now on a charter in progress, and we might be proceeding in one direction, only to zig in another direction. It's not possible to describe the evolutionary path we will be taking to get to the final product next fall. The first big question, which we called our first big topic, was whether we will have a town meeting centered form of government or a town council form of government. We identified this as our first question, and we took the idea of a mayor form off the table because, quite frankly, in all our investigations and explorations and gathering of information, we saw very little evidence supporting a mayor form in Plymouth. The first 2 votes we took last week settled for now the initial question of what direction we will be heading as we start out the drafting of the charter. And the commission, by a vote of 6-3, voted to commence the preparation of a charter centered on the town meeting form rather than a council form with no town meeting. It's interesting here to point out that the proponents of the town meeting form were quick to state, though they, and actually I was one of them in that group, wanted to keep town meeting as it is now. Instead, they want to do everything within their power to improve it and make it work better, even though that might require dramatic and even radical changes to the current language governing town meeting, and also revamp and modify charter provisions governing the various other boards and committees that interact with it. Changes to the Select Board, Planning Board, Moderator, Town Manager, and Advisory and Finance Committee would all be on the table to be discussed and perhaps made the subject of dramatic, perhaps even radical changes. One interesting observation is that with the town meeting form, we are also now considering a council to work along with it. The Council of Precinct Chairs, with enhanced powers, responsibilities. And a town meeting form with a council, yes, that might just happen. It's up to this commission. The third vote we took last week requires a more detailed explanation. We voted 6-3 against a motion to have 3 members of our commission who have stated they support a council form move ahead now and start drafting a charter centered on a town council with no representative town meeting. I can only speak for myself here, but it was my belief that this commission must be united as we move forward with the charter drafting. We can't be going off in two directions at once. And any suggestion that we simultaneously produce two charters is not wise. It's counterproductive. It will dilute the final product. And in any event, it's certainly premature. The effect of this vote is that all 9 commissioners will work together, at least for now, to develop a charter with town meeting centered and retained, and with a possible council, such as a council of precinct chairs, operating hand in glove with town meeting to carry out the legislative functions of the town. This would put Plymouth in a unique category with a representative town meeting and a council. But I fully believe the commission may want to take on this challenge. Yes, it's new and untried, but it would be carrying out Plymouth's tradition of moving its town meeting form forward with further modifications to add to its previous innovations, such as the caucus system for precinct representatives and the first in the state conflict of interest provisions. Plymouth's town meeting is currently viewed by many across the state as the gold standard of truly representative town meeting form of government. And we certainly want to continue in that tradition. And I believe the charter we are designing and starting now will do just that. Thank you. I understand a couple of other commissioners may like to also say something at this point. And I would, any other commissioner wish to speak at the moment? Betsy Hall?
Yes, thank you, Bill. Following last week's meeting, I received some emails from residents who expressed dismay concerning my vote for bringing only a town meeting form of government to the polls in 2023. I want to explain briefly my reasons for my decision. I did not vote for bringing 2 or 3 different forms of government to the ballot, as I believe that would send a message that I think all forms of local government are equal. I do not think that all forms of local government are equal. I believe that the town meeting form of government is vastly superior to the mayor or town council form of government. Therefore, I want to send a clear message to the residents of Plymouth that the only form of government I can support at this time includes a town meeting. When I am making a decision, I do not rely on rhetoric. I am interested in results. So far, no one, and I've asked many people, has given me the name of any town or city in Massachusetts which has a town council form of government that is in better shape than the town of Plymouth or is a better place to live. In addition, I have heard from several people that they do not believe that 6 people, they were referring to the 6 people on the Charter Commission, should be making a decision for 62,000. I agree with that, not as it refers to the Charter Commission, because that's what we have been asked to do, but I certainly do not agree with 6 or 7 people making decisions in a town council form of government that encompasses every decision in the town of Plymouth. You may have heard someone say that 6 members of the Charter Commission voted not to give the people a choice. That is misleading. When the residents of Plymouth vote to accept or reject the charter changes recommended by this committee, they will have a choice. I was elected to help improve the charter for the town of Plymouth. I will continue to do so to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Larry Pizer.
Thank you, Bill. I join you in suggesting that people look at Chapter 43B, which is the chapter that governs what we do. If they were to do so, can make it easy for them, mass.gov/legis. Click on General Laws and go to 43B, and there you are. I do this because my name was invoked over the past week or two in suggesting that there be that I support a different way of deciding where the town should be going as far as the charter is concerned. In particular, a non-binding referendum that will appear on the town's ballot. I didn't support it, I don't support it, and I'm surprised that there was a suggestion that at any time I was supportive of that. I have actually spoken to various members of the Select Board stating my opposition before they had actually passed it. The job of this commission is to study forms of government and to use judgment in providing their best ideas on a charter for the town of Plymouth. I believe that we've been doing that. The worst thing that you could possibly say to me is that I don't support democracy. Absolutely not true. Chapter 43B describes two different places where democracy should occur. First, in the initial election, where the question of whether or not there should be a charter commission, and then who the charter commissioner should be, that is place number one for democracy, and there will be a second place. If people are not satisfied with the work of this commission, vote no when it comes up 2 years from now, should we come up with a proposal. If you are supportive, hope you will be, vote yes. That is democracy. It's democracy as completely, clearly described in Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 43B. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. Bill Cohen?
I would just commend both Betsy and Larry on their comments. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more strongly. I think to cast a dispersion that because we are voting our conscience that somehow we're inhibiting the democratic process. I think this is a very important charge that we have to re-examine our form of government. When I ran for this position, I was clear where I stood. I wanted to make sure that we maintained a highly representative form of government, but I knew that we needed to make improvements. We will make improvements. The people of Plymouth will have a chance and a choice. And this board is designed to give the people of Plymouth expression in their democracy, not inhibiting that process.
Thank you, Bill. So we have tonight some logistical things we've got to get out of the way as we get started here. First of all, let me update you on the, well, first, Michelle, when our guest signs in, could you let me know? We may want to, because he may have a lot to say. We want to take him early if he comes. Thank you. Are there any other members of the commission registered on Zoom with us? Okay. So we reached out this past week on a number of fronts to move our work along. First, we invited the former town manager, Melissa Arraghi, and Lynn Barrett to come here to talk to us about what the council of precinct chairs might be able to do. The current committee of precinct chairs, if we want to add powers to it, we may change its name. What they can do between town meeting. So Lynn Barrett, of course, is right now totally wrapped up with town meeting. But she said she'll be here on April 4th, which is our next meeting date, which is after our annual town meeting. And she will talk and suggest areas of specific responsibilities that the Committee of Precinct Chairs can take on to act between town meetings to make the legislative process runs more smoothly. And that could be a very interesting discussion. We pointed out to her the areas that we've already looked at in terms of enforcement of the charter, legislative follow-up, and then actions and powers they could have in between the actual town meetings in terms of money items or whatever else comes up. So that's going to be on April 4th. The we haven't heard yet from Melissa, right? Okay. We'll be following up with her to see if she can join. We suggested that the two of them come on the same evening. We also contacted a couple of organizations, the Collins Center for Public Management in Boston, and also the Mass Municipal Association, to see if they could help us with any specific suggestions for guidance as we prepare the charter. But more specifically, we reached out to different law firms so that we would have a choice of counsel. I contacted, of course, KP Law, they being the town council, and I also contacted 3 other firms and got quite encouraging responses. They all seem to be very anxious to help Plymouth. And these are 3 excellent firms with lawyers who are experienced with municipal law. One of the firms is Anderson and Krieger, whom I know very well, having worked with them many times. They're currently town counsel to several firms north of Boston, Belmont, Winchester, Bedford. There's a whole list of firms, Concord, Dover, Ipswich, Lexington, Acton. So that will make us a proposal, and I'm going to suggest that they be present either by Zoom or in person on the 4th of April, along with other firms that are still in the running at that point. And we can hear from them, interview them, and then make a decision on who the counsel to this commission would be. In our inquiry, I said what we were looking for was experience in municipal law and hopefully with charters, but we didn't need a senior attorney firsthand always with us. We just needed a good lawyer who could work under our direction somewhere. I won't really call him a junior lawyer, but certainly not a very seasoned, very expensive lawyer, but somebody in the firm who can also work under the direction of the more experienced person in that firm. So we would get kind of the time put in by a qualified lawyer, but he'd be under the direction of a experienced lawyer within his firm, and of course under our guidance, what we tell him to do. This is how previous charters, commissions that I'm familiar with worked, and it seemed to be quite successful. I told him about 5 hours a week is what we're kind of looking for the lawyer. That would be specifically helping us from week to week. If any of you have any suggestions or changes here or anything, let me know, because as we're moving this process along. So that, the thinking would be that if we interviewed them on April 4th, we would make a decision, reviewing it over the next couple of weeks, and then our next meeting is the 25th. And I think by the 25th of April, we should be able to lock in who that person would be to help us as counsel. The next item is to continue our discussion. Now, last meeting, we explored in depth the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and the additional duties and powers and so forth are listed in tonight's agenda. So I'm asking now for some suggestions from commissioners and what our next step is. Do we want to put this aside for the moment until we hear from, well, Lynn can help us with specifics, but do we want to go on to the next boards? Do we want to discuss town meeting in more detail? I mean, the subjects are just sitting there waiting to be taken up for discussion. We have the town meeting, the moderator, the select board, advisory and finance committee, and the planning board, just for starters. Perhaps the next committee after the Council of Precinct Chairs, because that's connected with town meeting and legislative side, would perhaps be the advisory and finance committee. We'll stay in the legislative side. What do you think? Does that work?
I think that, Bill, we might consider subcommittees to discuss some of these other issues related to the larger charter, what the approach might be and how we might break that down.
The larger town meeting?
Yes. Well, so my thought as we look at this current charter and start to reevaluate what we want to change. And we just don't want to tweak this current charter. We need to put this charter up on the table and take a very serious look at different components of it. I'm very interested in the legislative oversight, the enforcement of actions of town meeting. If town meeting takes action and votes on an article, I'd like to see that carried through, and I need to see that in our charter. I also want to see how a FinCom can be more accountable to the budget that's proposed at town meeting, the finance end of this. So I think that we might think about structuring this discussion by having a group work on certain sections and bring it to the larger group.
Very good. Actually, one thing I wanted to say before we leave the Committee of Precinct Chairs is actually start the drafting now, after this meeting tonight, so that we might have a draft ready, really rough draft, of a new, bigger, more enhanced Committee of Precinct Chairs, so we can actually look at some language. And I'd like to have that ready so that we'll have it on April 20, certainly by April 25th. Really dig into it with a specific draft. So if any of you would like to participate in the drafting, you're welcome, or send ideas. I mean, we're already trying to figure out how the best way to start the drafting here is going to be. But I think there's nothing basic, there's so little in the charter now in the Committee of Precinct Chairs, so anything we're going to be drafting here is going to be new language, kind of a new chapter. Yes, Betsy? So if you want to send me your ideas, but I think by the 25th, I'd like to see we should have a rough draft. That would be a portion of a charter.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
We have, Michelle has been keeping track of some of the thoughts we had on the precinct chairs. Maybe that can be made available, the most recent version. We can send that back out again. You know, the running, yeah. Yeah, we could probably send that out to the group so that there's anything in there that we had noted that's related to the precinct chairs, that as we start to draft something, it reflects that and bring it back to the larger group.
Yeah, I would think as we take a specific topic, we would go back through the minutes and get back through Michelle's notes and see where that particular item had come up, and because we made a lot of sort of place savers as we've been going along with different parts of our government. The precinct chairs we've only been discussing in detail more recently.
Right.
But when we come to something like the Select Board or the Finance Committee, some of that goes way back. So we'll have to do a search function. Okay, so tonight, why don't we start then tonight to leave the Committee of Precinct Chairs aside for the time being. We'll start the drafting on it between now and our meeting on the 25th. And it might be ready by the 4th of April, but that's going to be a lot of housekeeping with lawyers and town officials, but certainly by the 25th. And now why don't we take up the, Bill, did you want to take up town meeting or itself or advisory and finance committee? Let's drill down on either one of those.
Yeah, I mean, we can take up advisory and finance.
Good. Right.
I mean, that's something that
So
we've...
we have the appointing, who appoints them?
Who appoints them?
Who can be on the committee?
Yep. So I think that we have had this discussion on and off over a period of time in the precinct, and when it comes to the Finance Committee, I think that's something that has something to, if the Committee of Precinct Chairs are going to have oversight in enforcement of the town meeting actions over a period of time, I think that we need to look at the Finance Committee differently than we look at it today. Totally reinventing the FinCom from a finance and advisory to more of a Ways and Means, where it is made up of town meeting members, that town meeting members are involved in building a budget. We talked about this budget building process. We had people in from FinCom saying that it isn't at the level that they would like to see it as. It's kind of an afterthought. They come to, there are subcommittees on FinCom that meet with different departments at different times, but as the town manager builds a budget, there should be some interaction with this Finance Committee, so the Finance Committee is well aware it's what's going to be proposed and asked of them. So as the town builds a budget, as FinCom hears these articles, and eventually as town meeting debates it, there's a natural progression of information that's escalating to the event of town meeting. So I think you can only get that effect by having the Finance Committee made up of town meeting members. It's unheard of to have a legislative body voting on a $260 million budget, and they're only being advised of this process and not engaged in the process. Usually when a body of this nature takes up and debates and votes on something, they're participating at a level that elevates the discussion at town meeting. If we're looking for accountability, we got a budget in front of us, and we have to vote on that. I think town meeting members have to play a larger role in that process. So that's the thing that I'm most focused on. I think when it
Did you
comes
say
to the
the-
Finance Committee,
Do they all have to be town meeting members? Or
yes,
include town meeting members?
I believe it should be all town meeting members.
All town meeting
Because town meeting is going to take up the budget, and they're going to debate the budget, and they're going to vote on the budget, and they better understand the budget. And you can only understand that budget if you're part of that process. That's how the budget process works in the legislative capacities of this nature, where you're bringing in 130 people or whatever the number may be. They're usually much more well-versed. One of the biggest complaints about this form of government, town meeting form of government, is that the town meeting members are not fully engaged on that budget. They end up debating lawnmowers and small details. And I think that we need to if town meeting is truly going to survive, it's going to tackle this very big issue, and that's accountability on a $260 million budget. And the only way we can justify moving forward with this form of government is making sure that when they vote on that budget, the most important thing they do, that they are well-versed in what's being asked of them. The only way to get them up to speed is have them engaged in that process. And I think that I feel very strongly about that issue since we began this process.
Frank?
My familiarity with that difference came from Brookline, which has I'll call it hybrid finance committee of advisory and finance. So they have appointed members that aren't town meeting reps, and they have town meeting reps. And now I can't say I'm aware of the origins of that, but it seems to me that there would be maybe a kind of experiential thing. Town meeting members can come and go, so can finance committee members, I guess. But if having people that are only focused on the finance, along with a good representation of town meeting members, seems to me to be a logical way to have a balance and a continuity, I guess is the word I'm looking for, year to year. If you depended upon town meeting members for this committee, you could lose several important people on a regular basis. So at least that's my understanding of why, or my guess, I guess I'd say, of why Brookline chose that. Now, they have, I think, something like 30-plus members on their advisory and finance committee, and maybe half or so approximately are town meeting reps and the others are appointed. And then we also had the discussion too, and I don't know how this would fit in, we had the discussion that the finance committee, the advisory and finance, would not deal with, or maybe it would be smart that it doesn't have to deal with non-financial issues, in which case I'm not sure how you parse that out between a committee that's not dealing with those issues and town meeting members who are. So anyway, it's clearly a complex issue. When you create almost out of whole cloth this new variation, there's ripple effects in every direction about how it's going to how it's going to actually be put into place.
So, Frank, looking at Brookline again, you say they had a mix of town meeting
Yeah.
members and non-town meeting members.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll look at their provision very closely.
I'm not adverse to
Right.
something to accommodate that. We do want the public involved in it, but in the final vote, I need to have people voting on this thing that understand the budget they're being asked of. The other thing is that we might have the Finance Committee focus on the finance of the
Right.
town. Because in years past, we had different finance chairs, and at different times, different interpretations of what the Finance Committee would actually review before town meeting. Maybe we divide that responsibility up where zoning articles or articles that are not financial in nature go through the Committee of Precinct Chairs and the Finance Committee, the finance articles, so that a Finance Committee is solely dedicated to this idea of the money.
Right, Frank,
I have the actual wording here. Thank you.
good.
And it's very interesting, now that we're getting down to nitty-gritty, paying attention to some of these specifics. The committee shall consist, this is Brookline, of not fewer than 20 nor more than 30 registered voters of the town. At least 16 committee members shall be elected town meeting members at the time of their appointment. And so the majority
Right.
in
Oh,
any situation. At least one elected town meeting member shall be appointed from each precinct. So they're also dispersing that for, balance. No more than 8 members shall be appointed who are not elected town meeting members at the time of their appointment. No more than 4 members of the committee shall reside in the same precinct. So that, it's pretty,
And how are the appointments made?
members, let's see. The moderator shall in June of each year appoint citizens to serve on the advisory committee. No compensation.
So in Brookline's case, they're all appointed by the moderator?
In this case, yes, but at least, well, more than half have to be town meeting members at the time of their appointment, and no more than 8 are not town meeting members. So if you had 24, you'd have to have 16 town meeting members and 8 appointed
Right.
from
Okay,
outside
so
of that.
we should all review that provision, I guess, explicitly. Yep. Larry?
I'm afraid you're going to be hearing this from me for the
Why
next year
change
and a
it?
half.
Why change it?
What we need in this instance and across the board is better planning. We have, with my apologies to any person who's on the planning board, we have a planning board that does a nice job of very specific work. And I'm not so sure what a wonderful job of long-term planning. We have a select board that deals with immediate problems, and I'm not so sure that we have a vision for the town of Plymouth. And we have a finance committee, having taken part in the work of the finance committee over 28 years and 28 cycles. They do a nice job of reviewing the specifics of the budget. And anyone who, they're doing a better job all the time. Anyone who wants to know about the budget, if you read the subcommittee reports, they explain in rather great detail why it's necessary for the town clerk to have new voting machines, or the Public Works Department to have a truck with 4 tires on it. What we don't know is, what do we expect the finances of the town to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Obviously, you can't make a guarantee, but if the town is going to be successful, one of the pieces that we have to have in this finance committee is a directive that there be a longer term, a longer horizon outlook for the town. Thank you.
Right. Do you think the finance committee does that, or is it done by the town staff?
Well, I think that the town staff should be doing it, but I think there needs to be, it's not simply a matter of the town staff. I think that there should be an outside body assisting the town staff in refining
Right.
those pieces. All of this is going to end up filtering back to the select board. And I think that when we finally get to deal with the select board, you'll hear from me that we want to give them a bigger push toward this vision of Plymouth.
Right. Betsy?
Yes. Thank you, Bill. I agree with Larry 100%, and one of the things that we looked at early on, I believe it was the town of Sharon had something called the Priorities Committee. And the Priorities Committee was just what Larry said. Their
Right.
job was to look 10 years out. that could be part of the Advisory and Finance Committee. One of their smaller committees could be a priorities committee, or it could, as in Sharon, it could actually be a separate committee. And I can find the details when we're ready for it of how that priorities committee gets appointed and, you know, who they are. But I think that long-term vision is absolutely essential for our finances. For example, one of the things that people have come before town meeting to talk about, and that is our debt in terms of benefits and so forth. So when we hire a new employee, I think that that should be part of looking at that priority. How is that going to affect our town 10 years from now? Every employee, how are they going to affect our town 10 years from now, 50 years from now? As we bring in new positions, how does that affect our long-term plan for controlling our finances? And I don't think there's a lot of that going on right now, so I 100% agree with Larry.
Yeah, just to add to what Betsy's saying and Larry's saying, this is not a difficult thing to achieve, because as you're building the yearly budget, you can be going back to the sources and asking, you need to prepare, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. That's something that this committee can start building on. But you're right, all of this has to be then overlaid with the planning process, because the other half of this equation is Plymouth is 50% undeveloped. And how we develop the other half of Plymouth is going to have a lot to do with the cost of services in this town and the finances of this town. And that has to become a major part of the dialogue of how things are going to look down the road. But you're right, the budget process needs to look long-term, and it has to be overlaid on the planning process, because the two have to be in line of what people should be knowing. People should know what they're in for when these planning processes are taking effect, what they're going to cost the town in the future.
Right. The process of developing the language, I'm just thinking the way we would do this, someone needs to, the draftsman needs to take the provision that's currently in the charter and then look at that, and then take all these ideas that we're discussing here tonight, and then start rewriting, maybe rewrite completely, but, you know, we got to start with something that's already there, and then add everything that we've been talking about to it. Is that a logical way of doing this? It was easy with the committee of precinct chairs, because they have very little to do. But now with the finance committee, we're getting into some real meat and potatoes in the charter. So we need to take those provisions and see how they're going to get changed. So tonight, we talked about who's going to be a member of the committee.
Correct.
And we looked at a model in Brookline and how they split them up.
Right.
And we looked at how the committee is appointed. We haven't really discussed that yet. I'm not sure there's any consensus yet on who's going to do these appointments.
Yeah. We had talked about the committee of precinct chairs appointing and the moderator appointing, or
We split the appointments up, have a joint.
Yeah, have it looked at that way.
A lot of the issues that we discuss here have come up before in discussions. That particular one, who appoints the finance committee, was debated at length in 2017, and a committee was organized that now does the appointments to the charter review, and that's actually a committee, but having the moderator disperse its power into a committee was not approved in 2017. So this is going to be revisiting that particular issue.
Basically revisiting that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there were elements to that revision that needed a greater examination. I think that discussion at town meeting showed some indication by town meeting what they were actually looking for in terms of the division of that power. So we learned from that debate. I think this body could come up with an improved version of what had been discussed before, because there was some shortcomings. And it was interesting, as we made our way to town meeting with this charter committee's proposal around that question, some very important questions came up, and so I think we need to take those into account when we start looking at what a finance committee might look like, And I think one of the things we have to do is look at where they're having success, and Larry's absolutely right. These guys spend a lot of time, deliberate for many hours, and put together very detailed reports. We want to build on that. And we want to make that information not stop on the committee level, but actually end up on the floor of town meeting in an elevated debate.
If we, I mean, that whole debate was picking members of the community, not town meeting members, and who's going to do it.
I think what did you, I think you had it was, what we had proposed to town meeting, and town meeting voted it down, was this idea of, that there'd be different people appointed by different committees.
Right. No, as I remember, there was a close vote on whether or not it would be done by committee when we came to the finance committee.
I'm not proposing that this time.
Right.
I'm proposing something dramatically different, where we're looking at something more on the Brookline view, where we have town meeting members serving on that board, a majority, at least.
So you're saying you'd stick with the moderator making the appointment?
It would be a combination between the moderator and maybe the committee of precinct chairs.
Right.
I like the idea that the moderator and the precinct chairs have to work together to come up with these members. I think that something is something we want to build on.
Right. So you
I wonder if has it happened yet?
What?
I mean, the charter committee recommendations,
happened yet.
it hasn't happened as of yet.
Happen.
Yeah, so,
I think we're about due. If it was 2017, 5 years, it'd be 2022.
really. And and that
been
committee's
thinking about
work
that.
is just coming into effect.
Right.
Took a long time for the state to approve these things.
Right. But I think it was a 2017 initiative.
Yep. You got a question down there?
Betsy?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And Bill, I always like to think in terms of walking through a scenario. So anything that is proposed to me or that I'm proposing, I like to actually take the steps as if it had been passed already. So let's suppose we're talking about, as we're talking about the town meeting members will be more involved with the budget. Can you tell me exactly what that would look like? The chairman of something would go visit the finance committee department, or, how would that actually play out?
Very similar to how it's playing out now, because Larry's absolutely right. The finance committee does, they deliberate, they have meetings, there's subcommittees, they're meeting with staff as the budget's being built. There is an engagement that I only want to improve on. So we would actually keep the finance committee's current structure intact, but what we would be doing is putting in place town meeting members to serve in this capacity. So this information goes beyond the briefing book that we get at town meeting. You actually have live, in-person people at town meeting that were going through that process. I did note that during our discussions with the finance committee, there were finance committee members that came in and said, yeah, we do work with the town. The town manager works with the board of selectmen, they build a budget. There are subcommittees to the finance committee, but the subcommittees are kind of just, they exist to interact with this department to find out where they're going, but it really is kind of an FYI kind of experience for the subcommittees, as much as if subcommittees are, I guess that there was I did get the feeling from the finance committee about these subcommittees that they were not having the effect that they would hope to have on that level. That's my distinct impression when the FinCom members came in and came before us and talked about their process and walked us through it. They told us about this subcommittee process, and they would like to see a greater, they'd like to see a little bit more accountability on that level. That rather than the subcommittee just kind of hear what they're going to do, they would like to be involved earlier in the process so that they could have some say in what those subcommittees will bring you forward to the larger committee. So I think that's the one thing I discovered over a period of time of listening to the finance committee was the subcommittee process wasn't, it's there, it exists, but there was some disappointment in its effectiveness. So that when you walk through this process, that's exactly, I wouldn't want to overturn the apple cart so much that we have confusion. I think that there are aspects of that finance committee that are working very well. But I just want to have town meeting members participating in the process, and I want to strengthen the subcommittee level.
Could I finish up, just finish this discussion? So, Bill, I'm a town meeting member, and so from precinct 12, if we didn't have anybody from precinct 12 who was serving on this advisory and finance committee that some town meeting members would in, how would I benefit as a town meeting member differently from how I'm benefiting now?
So I guess how you benefit is that rather than the experience, walking through the experience. So the finance committee meets months in advance, subcommittees, budgets being built, budget warrant opens, articles are placed on the warrant. Now the articles are coming before the finance committee. They're hearing these articles. They hear them, they vote on them, and then they prepare material for town meeting, briefing material. We get, different books. We can get a book from, supporting documents. We have other, the warrant and the articles. We have these materials that are sent. And those materials are sent to us in an advisory capacity. I feel something's lost in the translation, that preparing this material should still exist, but it's being prepared by anywhere from, I guess right now we're going to have 18 precincts, or as the model has it in Brookline, there's actually more than that. They have a number of people serving on their FinCom. It could be more than 18. But now you have 18 people at town meeting floor that were on subcommittees, that built a budget, that debated the budget, and now through osmosis on the floor of town meeting, you have an elevated level of information on the floor. This avoids the debate about a lawnmower. Maybe we can elevate the debate to something else, because yes, on the committee level, FinCom builds a budget, subcommittees, prepares the supporting documentation, sends it to town meeting, and now town meeting takes up the debate, and you have 18 people in the room on town meeting floor that participated, that can get up and participate in the debate now, rather than having a FinCom over there in a corner saying nothing, and you have a chairman getting up and making advisory comments to the material that was sent to the board. There's something lost in the translation.
It sounds to me like it'd be better to have one person from each precinct, so that when we caucus, there's somebody that's been part of the
Correct.
process all the way along. So
Absolutely.
not just say 6 town meeting members or 8 town meeting
No.
members, but one from each precinct.
Correct.
Who would, because sometimes we always have somebody from advisory and finance come to our caucuses, but we don't always hear the whole story.
No, you definitely, in the Brookline model and other models we looked at, in the tradition here in Plymouth, is that we always had someone on FinCom representing one precinct, and that's what the intention would continue to be, that we would have someone from one precinct each on the FinCom.
I see, thank you.
No, Larry.
Bill, I want to make a distinction, both bills, between the budget article, the basic budget article, and then the rest of the articles, because we've been kind of flip-flopping.
Okay.
The budget article is built 98%, 99% by the finance director and the town manager. The information is farmed out to divisions and departments, but that's where the basic information comes. And then there are judgments made, and in comparatively rare instances, the judgment is overturned by FinCom. It's different in the articles themselves, anything past 9, where it comes to the advisory part, and whether we give that to advisory and finance or to some other, the committee of precinct chairs, that doesn't much matter. It's still going to be the same. But we need to make sure that we appreciate the timeline. The timeline says the town manager creates a budget and presents it to the select board sends it to the advisory and finance committee, and so that it's been digested in great detail long before it gets
To
to
FinCom.
the finance committee.
Right.
Then there's the issue of, I have a specific project that I want to accomplish, whole different scheme of getting there.
Correct.
Okay,
Got it.
good
In,
point.
in the thought is that we just complement that by, there are current, in that process you described, there are subcommittees that do reach out to different departments early in the process and try to get a handle on what they're going to hear in a number of weeks. So I would just, give that process a little bit more definition so that you're right, it is the town manager's responsibility with our director of finance to propose these budgets, and they're doing it on a staff level because departments are being farmed out different aspects of it and coming back. I'm just saying that we would only strengthen that process. I don't want to overturn that process because that process is working. It's just making sure that people who end up voting on this know as much as Lynn and the town manager and the board of selectmen when it comes to voting on these things.
Bill, two questions. I think,
Oh,
I think we need to drill down as to whether or not, and this gets kind of like whether or not the Brookline model is one that we should follow or not follow. Is it better to have a finance committee that's separate and independent from town meeting? Independent is what's key here, and they're sitting over here and they're making recommendations to the town meeting. That's one model. Or is it better that the finance committee is sort of infused within the town meeting?
Oh, I'm advocating that town meeting, that the finance committee be infused
up
into town meeting.
Yeah, see,
That's where-
which works better, I guess, I'm sort of
I think
sorting
we-
out in my head.
Right, I think that what we've had is the other
Right,
equation
we've seen
here
the
in the
other
town of Plymouth, where the FinCom is separate from town meeting. It's advisory town meeting, it's looking at information. But this comes from, I mean, it's, it's very helpful to have Larry here, because Larry has seen this process in his capacity as clerk. In my capacity, going before the FinCom for the last 20 years, twice a year, presenting articles that we write and put onto the warrant, and then have to prepare supporting documents to, and making presentations to the select board, and making presentations to the finance committee. We've also known that we got to get in front of the town manager and let the town manager know what we're planning to do, and the finance director. So we work with the finance. The CPC's had to work with our finance director, our town manager, the
Right.
selectmen, and then get in front of FinCom. And during that process, I've just observed through osmosis these other things that are happening around me that indicate to me like, wow, this FinCom does a lot of work. That's my whole point. Finance committee does a lot of work, but the work ends up in the form of these documents that's sent to town meeting, and at times they're not the easiest things to translate if you weren't on the ground early on in the process. It reminds me of what Lyndon Johnson said when he said that, if you want me on the landing, you'll get me on the takeoff. And I think that we need to kind of focus on that component of this. And I think that when it comes to appointment, Betsy's right. We need to have somebody that represents each precinct. Maybe the precinct chairs are they're the police that make sure that each precinct is properly represented on the FinCom. There's your 18. The precinct committee of precinct chairs is in charge of identifying the 18 people in the 18 precincts. And maybe we set aside something for the moderator to complement, as Frank has indicated, that in the Brookline model, there's citizens at large. Maybe that's where the citizens at large come from the moderator. So it could be a combination effect.
Mr. Lindsay's
Frank, did you say something?
Mr. Lindsay's on.
Yeah, okay, I'm watching it. Time is it? Is it 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock. Okay. Scott, wanted to ask?
Just a
ahead.
quick one. If you remember from our last Charter Review Committee, one of the things when we started talking about the FinCom was that currently there's a prohibition of town employees being on it. I think that's the vilification of town employees is very misplaced. I think that the people, much like we lean towards Larry, why do we lean on Larry? He's our resident expert, right? So
Okay.
who knows more about, things that occur in the town and in the different departments than the people who do it every day? That I would revisit that whole wanting to see that removed, that prohibition that's currently in the charter from town employees serving. And in the same context, if we increase, to Wrestling's statement last meeting, if we increase the accountability under the conflict of interest enforcement, I think that would probably satisfy the naysayers, so to speak. So I think it's a double-edged sword. Remove that prohibition, but at the same time, add the conflict of interest supervision to it, so that I think that would satisfy the people who don't want town employees on it because they think they're somehow going to vote themselves a raise or
But
something.
I think we've just barely touched the surface now of the Finance Committee. We started tonight, got a long way to go. I think between now and the next meeting, why don't we each take the Finance Committee sections of our charter that currently exist, mark them up, make notes, make changes, so we'll have some actual language in front of us that we're going to change between now and then. I think each one of us should do it. And then at the end of that discussion, somebody can then put together the comments and come up with a draft. I think that's the way we'll push this thing forward, but start with our own charter, because there is a lot of language in there already.
Right.
Okay, so, Michelle, why don't we go ahead with our guest? This is Mr. Lindsay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mr. Lindsay, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
Do
So,
you want to have your picture shown, or we're going to, it's up to you. We see your,
that would be fine. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so if somebody could make me a co-host.
okay, good. Michelle, could you ask the PAC TV to make it louder, please? Make it louder? Yeah, it's a little bit hard to hear it. Yeah, we're just going to turn up the volume so that we can hear everything you're saying. So Mr. Lindsay, let me first introduce you. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah,
You're still kind of faint, but can everybody hear him? Okay, this is Mr. Thomas Lindsay. He's Senior Legal Counsel of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. It's an organization that globally advances community environment, legal defense fund, and legal rights of nature and environmental rights. He's the co-founder of the community rights, right of nature movements, and he's on the board of advisors of the New Earth Foundation. And this particular area, contemporary community rights and rights of nature, is been now the subject of several hundred laws across the United States and around the world. He's co-founder of the Pennock Democracy School, which is now taught in 24 states, graduated over 5,000 lawyers, which assists groups to elevate rights of communities over rights claimed by corporations. So it's a fascinating topic. He's the author of many books on the subject, and he lives in Spokane, Washington. And we're delighted to have you here tonight because we're trying to figure out, Mr. Lindsay, how we can put something in our charter that advances this cause of the rights of nature. So, welcome, and we are eager to hear. In your first slide, we see it loud and very clear and on the screen. Can you hear us? You may be on mute. We see the picture, but we don't have hear the sound yet.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we hear you talking now, yes.
You can hear me now.
We hear you now, and we see the slide.
Great, fantastic. So I had the privilege of the last couple minutes listening to you guys about the budget and finance stuff. So you're covering quite a bit of ground between finance issues and legal rights of ecosystems. So
Right.
lots of credit for that. So kind of here tonight to give the speed version of the rights of nature work that's been happening in the United States and around the globe. I know that you guys are grappling with the concept and perhaps including it within the vote on the charter amendments. And so I have about a little over 30 slides I want to run through very quickly and then hopefully have time for a couple questions. But the concept is, of course, the rights of nature, and this PowerPoint covers, this is the PowerPoint that we give mostly for education, continuing legal education for lawyers in different places. And then we've spliced it with some different materials that might be of interest to the commission itself. So we're talking about the rights of nature, what the theory is, what is this about, laws and emerging jurisprudence across the US and also internationally. So the question is, what is it in terms of rights of nature and where does it come from? And the rights of nature work really grows from the failure of conventional environmental law to protect, life support systems and protect the natural environment itself. Kind of an inability of the conventional environmental legal system to confront current environmental challenges. I probably don't have to go through these for folks there, but just pick out a couple. 40% of all US waterways still fail to meet even the minimum clean water standards in the United States, and those were passed back in the 70s. Half of all plant and animal species have been driven to extinction. 80,000 industrial chemicals are currently at use, and 700 are now found within every human body. And of course, the elephant in the room is climate change. The global climate change threatens to wipe out, in some ways, even the small advances that have been made through the application of conventional environmental law. So the rights of nature are really a response to that failure of the legal system to actually protect the natural environment. And it's the recognition by legislation or through court-made law of the legally enforceable rights of nature, ecosystems, and species. So it means recognizing civil rights type protections for nature, ecosystems, or species. And of course, that bends our brains a little bit because we're used to talking about civil rights type protections for humans. We're used to the US, Constitution Bill of Rights. We're used to our state Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Rights within the Massachusetts Constitution. But this actually means recognizing rights not on behalf of humans as civil rights type protections, but on behalf of nature. And it's generally been seen as an attempt to augment or strengthen existing environmental laws by heightening the types of protections afforded to nature. So some of the benefits when you do that include expanded standing, so the ability to get into court, for example. Sometimes humans and environmental groups are barred from court because they can't show some kind of injury from some threatened action. And also new and elevated standards of protection for ecosystems and restoration of those ecosystems required as a remedy, which is something that you very rarely remedy under conventional environmental laws. And of course, rights of nature has indigenous origins. I'm in fact speaking to you today from the Nez Perce Reservation, where the tribe has passed a rights of nature law last year, and we're assisting them to begin to implement that. But this concept of rights and nature itself not being owned, that nature should be something other than property. And in fact, the First Nations speak about nature being a living being or as a relative, which is much different than the way Western civilization talks about nature. So it's kind of the difference between the indigenous viewpoint, which is nature as a living being, The Anishinaabe people in Minnesota talk about protecting the flying people, the birds, the swimming people, the fish, the singing people, also birds. Yurok Nation talks about the Klamath River as a relative or a living being. And we really need to contrast that to a Western or European system of law, the one that most of us live under, where nature is kind of a dead thing, whose use is to be regulated. And I think there's no better quote than the one from Sir Francis Bacon, who once said that the whole reason for Western civilization was to torture nature on a rack to extract her secrets. So I don't think I'm the only one who sees a disjunction between torturing nature on a medieval instrument of torture to extract secrets versus the way that indigenous peoples talk about nature in terms of being a relative or being connected. Now, the rights of nature has moved, of course, from the indigenous kind of understanding and culture into Western law. It's happened very, very slowly. It began in the 1970s with a USC law professor named Christopher Stone, who wrote a law review article, paper, titled "Should Trees Have Standing?" And in this paper, which became very influential, he talked about nature actually holding rights and how crazy that sounds to a lot of people. But of course, he made the comparison that rights for others, including women in the 1840s, African Americans, prior to the Civil War, that all of those things sounded crazy and unthinkable, but that he was quite seriously proposing, at the bottom of this quote, that we give legal rights to forests, oceans, rivers, and other so-called natural objects, and indeed to the natural environment as a whole. So with most law review articles, papers that people write, they sit on a shelf, gather dust. I've written quite a few that are probably gathering dust in some law library at this point. But his article, in a perfect storm, came together with a U.S. Supreme Court case called Sierra Club versus Morton. The details are relatively unimportant, except that this was a Walt Disney ski resort that wanted to build a facility bigger than Disneyland in Mineral King Valley, which is on the eastern side of California, across from Sacramento. The Sierra Club sued to stop the development. The lower courts dismissed the club because they found that there was a lack of standing, and i.e. the Sierra Club didn't have the legal authority to set foot in court to defend against the development because they couldn't show they were injured by the proposed development by the Walt Disney Ski Resort project. So the case got appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court also affirmed the fact that the Sierra Club hadn't shown standing to be in court, and actually dismissed the case. The reason why people remember this case is because there was a dissenting opinion filed by one of the Supreme Court justices, Justice Douglas, who's probably one of the more progressive judges that we've seen on the court. But he actually embraced Christopher Stone's concept, in fact, quoted his paper in the dissenting opinion in that U.S. Supreme Court decision, and talked about giving standing to meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, rivers, groves of trees, et cetera, to avoid this problem that humans shouldn't have to show injury to people for these projects that are so clearly going to damage the natural environment. So it kind of elevated this concept of rights of nature and access to the courts for ecosystems into the public eye, moved it beyond just an indigenous value system into Western law, or started to. So since 2006, about 36 municipalities have adopted these rights of nature laws. In essence, municipal level laws that recognize legally enforced nature. The first one was in 2006, a little place called Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania. And just, I'm feeling my age lately, but actually drafted that law back in 2006 with the Tamaqua Borough Council. The issue in Tamaqua Borough was a plan to dump dredge waste from the Delaware River into open mine pits in Tamaqua Borough, a very small municipality of about 7,000 people. And in addition to banning that waste from coming into the municipality, the folks within the municipality drafted a local law with our help that recognized the waterways that would be affected by the dumping of PCB-laden dredge into the municipality, protecting them with rights, recognizing that those rivers and other waterways had the rights to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve within the municipality in an effort to stop that dumping from taking place in Tamaqua Borough. And I think to many people's amazement, it passed back in 2006, became the first rights of nature law in the world. Folks may have heard the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in 2019. Lake Erie has had a number of problems stemming from cyanobacteria algae blooms, kind of red tide or green tide problems in Lake Erie, and a failure of the state and federal government to actually do anything to help Lake Erie recover from that. An amendment to the city charter of Toledo was proposed that would recognize the lake as having rights to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve. And in February of 2019, 62% of Toledo voters voted to approve the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. The most recent example is Orange County. Orange County, which is where Orlando is located, is not a small county. It's 1.5 million people. And in 2020, it became the largest municipality in the United States to adopt a rights of nature law. This one specifically protecting the Wekiva and Econlockhatchee rivers within Orange County as having the rights to exist, flow, be free of pollution, and maintain a healthy ecosystem. And in November of 2020, the amendment passed with 89% of the vote. And as folks work on initiatives and referendum know, getting 89% means that there was a good degree of crossover between the left and right, or conservative and liberal voters within the county. I talked earlier about indigenous understanding of the rights of nature. Several tribes, 6 tribes within the United States have actually adopted rights of nature laws. The Ho-Chunk, the Ponca, the White Earth Ojibwe in Minnesota, the Menominee, the Yurok Nation, and the Nez Perce Nation, who I met with this morning, have passed resolutions and laws recognizing the rights of different ecosystems. The Nez Perce last year passed a resolution recognizing the rights of the Snake River, for example. In 2018, we assisted the White Earth Reservation, this is the Chippewa in Minnesota, to adopt the world's first rights of nature law that protects a plant species. I know you guys are looking at the pine barrens as an ecosystem. Kind of the Chippewa in Minnesota, we're looking at Menomin, which is wild rice in Ojibwe, but recognizing the rights of wild rice to exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve, as well as have other rights. So the White Earth Ojibwe, White Earth Band in Minnesota in 2018. To date, as I mentioned, over 36 municipal and tribal governments have adopted rights of nature laws across the United States. And I just wanted, for purposes of tonight, to really focus down on one place, just to look at, to examine what these laws look like. What are the, in legal terms, irreducible minima of these laws? What do they contain? And for that case study, we decided to turn to Pittsburgh, which hired us as counsel to write a law banning fracking within the city of Pittsburgh. Hydrofracking was a big issue within the city. And provisions of the law, which not only banned hydrofracking, but which recognized the rights of ecosystems within the city of Pittsburgh, specifically to protect the 3 rivers within the city, because the law applies specifically to them as well. So what are the 3 main elements of Pittsburgh's rights of nature law? Well, they are the Declaration of Rights, standing, and remedies. This is the recognition of rights looks like. There are 2 parts to it. One is a right to water. So this is more of a human right, but also melded with community ecosystems having that right. And then a rights of natural community section, which extends rights to wetlands, streams, rivers, aquifers, and other water systems. So rights, sometimes you see rights component in these laws dealing both with human rights as well as the rights of nature itself. And Pittsburgh was an early example of that. Standing, people generally ask, well, who can sue over these laws? Who can sue to enforce these rights? The Pittsburgh provisions are pretty standard, that residents of the city, any resident of the city has standing to enforce the rights on behalf of natural communities and ecosystems. And those actions have to be brought in a court, obviously has a jurisdiction over ordinance enforcement within the city of Pittsburgh. So standing for all residents, and then describing the court that those enforcement actions can be brought in. Damages in the Pittsburgh law measured by the cost of restoring the natural community or ecosystem to its pre-damaged state, and paid, and most of the rights of nature laws are the same, and being paid to the municipal entity to be dedicated for a restoration to the ecosystem pre-damaged state. Basically, is the way that the laws talk about restoration. So the elements of these rights of nature, municipal laws in these 36 communities, including the tribal and municipal communities, a declaration of legal rights, which in essence sets a heightened standard of environmental protection, generally above and beyond these regulatory standards or traditional environmental law, a recognition of standing for residents or tribal members, and a requirement of a remedy, which generally means restoration is required as a remedy within these laws. In terms of direct enforcement, there's been several cases filed over the course of the last year, which has been probably the most active in the US, of direct enforcement of these rights of nature laws. Probably the best one to look at for charter purposes here is this case, Wild Cypress Branch, which was brought in Florida. It was filed to enforce the Orange County, Florida Charter Amendment. And the reason why we're talking about this is just to give you an idea what enforcement looks like, because a lot of people always wonder, well, what does it look like to bring an enforcement case? This one was filed to enforce that charter amendment that passed by 89% in November of 2020. A developer has proposed to fill over 100 acres of wetlands and other waters in Orange County for the construction of a 1,900-acre housing and commercial development. So the developer, Beachline South Residential Incorporated, wants to build a 1,900-acre development. As part of that, it would mean filling in over 100 acres of wetlands. The Orange County Charter Amendment recognizes those wetlands as having a right to exist. In other words, a right to life for wetlands is one way to look at it. And the lawsuit was filed to apply that those rights of nature, that right to exist, to stop the filling of the wetlands and to stop the permitting process that was engaged in by the state of Florida to legalize the filling in of those wetlands. The first set of claims for the lawsuit is directly against the developer to say that the county rights of nature law prohibits the filling of wetlands. So the Charter Amendment recognizes the right to exist, flow, be free of pollution, maintain a healthy ecosystem. Filling of the wetlands would violate the right to exist. And the count asks for the court to enjoin the actions of the developer that would violate those legal rights. So in other words, forcing the developer to redesign, in essence, the development plan to avoid the impact on wetlands. The second set of claims is not against the developer, it's against the state, essentially arguing that the state itself can't issue a permit which violates the county charter. So can't issue a permit that violates the provisions that were adopted with the charter. And so this claim asks for the court to enjoin the issuance of the permit that is being issued for the project. Other enforcement cases, there are two others to take note of. Both have been filed in tribal court. So for folks not familiar with tribal governments, indigenous communities, they're recognized as federal tribes in the United States, sometimes have their own court systems. And it's felt that those court systems are more receptive to rights of nature claims than regular state or county courts or even federal courts. So you've had two cases filed in tribal court, and I know we're going pretty quickly here, but just to spend a second on these, is that in Minnesota, the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, again, that's the Chippewa, took their rights of wild rice law that we talked a couple minutes ago, and actually filed a lawsuit against the state of Minnesota to stop it from issuing a 5 billion gallon water permit that was issued for the construction of the Line 3 tar sands oil pipeline, which is scheduled and is pumping oil now, actually, from Alberta down to the Great Lakes. The case alleges that the rights of wild rice contained within the tribal law is being violated by the withdrawal of 5 billion gallons of water by the Enbridge Corporation for the construction and operation of the Line 3 tar sands oil pipeline. The primary plaintiff in the case, and just like you saw in Florida, the plaintiff is not a human, which again bends our brains sometimes because that's what we're used to seeing. The primary plaintiff in the White Earth case is Monoman itself. So because wild rice is protected by the tribal law itself, that the plaintiff itself is wild rice. And in Florida, the plaintiff itself is Wild Cypress Branch, which is one of the tributaries that's affected or will be affected by the 1,900-acre development there. And the newest addition to the enforcement cases happened in January of 2022, so just a couple months ago. The Sauk-Suattle tribe in my home state of Washington State filed suit to force the city of Seattle to build fish passage around the Skagit River dams, asserting that salmon have rights. So salmon rights versus the fact that the Skagit River dams are helping to kill off salmon populations in my part of the country. And the primary plaintiff is salmon in that case. So again, kind of different kind of system to get our brains around in terms of plaintiffs there. And finally, just to end up tonight, I just wanted to give a glimpse of some of these international laws and jurisprudence that are happening in case it may inform work on the Charter Commission around these issues. It tends to be that rights of nature has moved faster and deeper in other countries than in the US, but there's been quite a bit of development internationally in the rights of nature field. Again, showing my age, the Ecuadorian Constitutional Assembly brought us in back in 2008 down to Ecuador to assist with the writing of the new Ecuadorian Constitution. It became the first constitution in the world to actually embody or incorporate rights of nature provisions. And you can see some of the cases that have been brought underneath those provisions. One dealt with dumping of road waste into a river. That was the Vilcabamba River case in 2011. There was a shrimp farming case in 2015. The Galapagos Islands shark finning cases back in 2015 also was an application of rights of nature laws. And finally, what folks may or may not have heard about, the most recent decision that came down, actually nullifying mining permits in the Los Cedros Forest Reserve. That decision came out just a month ago as a violation of the rights of nature provisions of the Ecuadorian Constitution. So that was a big case by the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court in terms of applying the rights of nature to activities that violate those rights within the country of Ecuador. And essentially coming out of Ecuador, you have these doctrines that have been produced. Nature is a subject of rights according to the Ecuadorian Constitution. People are standing to invoke those rights. And those rights of nature provisions have widespread applications now in civil, criminal, administration, and other laws, administrative and other laws. There's also been some global jurisprudence from the courts, and I know this is kind of like drinking from a fire hose, but this is the overview here. In India, Colombia, and Bangladesh. In India, courts have recognized the Ganges River and other ecosystems, including some glaciers, as having certain rights. In Colombia, the highest court in the nation has recognized the Rio Atrato, the Atrato River, which is a prime large tributary flowing through Colombia, as having certain rights. They've also recognized the Amazon and the Amazon region, the bioregion, as having certain rights, all under that rubric of rights of nature. In Bangladesh, the High Court of Bangladesh has recognized that all rivers within the country of Bangladesh have legal rights. So again, international jurisprudence. And finally, to conclude this sprint, other countries and other municipalities have adopted rights of nature laws. Just 2 weeks ago, Panama signed national legislation into effect, adopting rights of nature law similar to that passed in Ecuador. In Bolivia, in 2010, the national legislature passed a law of the rights of Mother Earth. In New Zealand in 2014, the parliament there recognized the Wanganui River and a national park as having certain legal rights. A couple of municipalities in Brazil have passed rights of nature laws. Uganda has amended its National Environmental Act to include rights of nature. At least one municipality or municipal unit in Mexico, another one in Australia, and the first rights of nature law in Canada was passed last year by an indigenous government and a Western municipality in Canada to protect the Magpie River. And one that's so new that hasn't even made our PowerPoint yet is there are a couple local governments in Ireland that have adopted and are in the process of adopting rights of nature laws at the district level, which is the municipal level in Ireland. So that's kind of it, like drinking from a fire hose, but we can make this PowerPoint available to the commission and folks that have questions or want additional materials. This is our webpage and also our email address.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Members of the commission, do you have questions for Mr. Lindsay? Actually, I have a couple that you piqued my interest. I mean, it's certainly a fascinating area. You mentioned specific cases in Florida and Pennsylvania. Do you have any information as to whether these kind of laws would be able to be, with the current jurisdictions in Massachusetts, whether any of these laws could be put into effect at a local level, or would it have to be done at the state level?
Yeah, so we're not licensed to practice, I'm not licensed to practice in Massachusetts, but we have done work in the state on the western side. There have been a couple groups that have used the town meeting process to place a warrant article on the warrant to vote a rights of nature provision into place. It failed by, I think, 20 votes where it was presented, but it was presented to protect the Housatonic River. We don't see anything in Massachusetts law that would prevent a locality or a municipality from adopting provisions to institute this kind of new environmental protection system.
Another area I was interested in was your international slides. Have these rights been recognized, for example, like by the European Union's International Court of Justice? I mean, is this now part of established international law?
It is and it isn't. The United Nations is working on a Rights of Nature Declaration. We worked on that several years ago. But I think the concept is still relatively new, even though it's been in the discourse, at least in the US, since 2006. I will say that we have to understand that the courts in Colombia, India, and Bangladesh, other countries, have recognized these rights without any legislation in place. So without a constitutional amendment, without national legislation, and they are calling it the new emerging norm of international environmental law. So basically using the concept as jurisprudence, even if they're not operating in a jurisdiction with either national legislation in place or constitutional amendment. And I have to say, the reason why people do this, something that 20 years ago probably was seen as laughable or kind of radical, and it still is seen that in certain circles, certain circles, is because of the utter ineffectiveness of existing environmental laws, that we are in a crisis at this point. We may not feel it day to day at times, but between the large-scale global environmental crises that we're now facing and the more localized crises of overdevelopment and water quality and quantity and those types of things, as a lawyer that practiced for a decade enforcing the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, I came to the conclusion that several other environmental lawyers have come to, which is that the system has failed us and we need something different. And I think that this kind of movement, which is driving this new paradigm forward, is similar, at least in large thematic ways, with the abolitionists and the suffragists and conferring new rights on populations and constituencies that were previously treated as property. And that may sound like a huge thing to undertake as a municipal charter commission, but to us, it's the only way it's going to take hold. And anything's going to change is if more and more localities begin to adopt and embrace this kind of approach.
Bill Cohen?
Hello, Bill Cohen. Thank you for your presentation. I was just kind of building on what Bill Abbott was just indicating, the chair, in terms of our local state laws, in terms of the Wetlands Protection Act and our local bylaws. You referenced that the need for this has been elevated by some of the, that there is a perception right now that these local state and local laws are not doing what they should be doing to protect these resources. Is that, you were touching on why you think there's a growing interest in this discussion around the rights of nature?
Yeah,
Is that an
I don't
accurate
think.
account of what you're
I don't-
saying?
Yeah, I don't think we would be here if there wasn't a frustration with the way that state, federal, and local regulations treat affected constituencies or communities who care about a particular ecosystem.
Yeah.
We almost have a regulatory environmental system that in some ways seeks to exclude those who feel the strongest about environmental protection around something that they care about. And in fact, I'll go so far after 10 years of representing zoning, working in zoning hearing boards and appealing permits and trying to enforce the nation's federal environmental laws, that we're in a place where it sounds funny to say it, but that the environmental laws really don't protect the environment.
Right.
And so it's no surprise that we ended up in this place, I think.
Right.
But it's really time to overhaul or at least augment the existing system, because otherwise we're kind of
You're
involved
looking
in
at
a
this.
suicide pact.
Yeah,
of
you're
sorts.
looking at this as an augmentation to what you might have locally or statewide to build on the frustration. I know that Frank is on the board here, on the commission, and he serves on the planning board, and I serve on the zoning board of appeals, and it has been frustrating to watch the implementation of the Conservation Commission and the Wetlands Protection Act, and some of the responsibilities that we have as a permitting body. But it's curious, have you seen how local municipalities adopt this material? Where do they accommodate it in their, how have you seen it implemented in other towns and communities?
surprised.
You mentioned different municipalities across the country adopting it. What are your thoughts on, what form does that adoption take? Is it just kind of a adoption of this theory, or does it take actually the form of some sort of local bylaw that has some sort of enforcement?
Definitely, it's not a resolution. It's not a feel-good resolution. We don't work on those. It's actually binding law with binding enforcement authority. And so I think the city of Pittsburgh offers a very good parallel for your question, which is that the city council unanimously adopted these rights of nature provisions as part of their charter. And so now you can find it within the Pittsburgh City Charter, and there's also subsections of it which are found within the Pittsburgh City Code. But binding, enforceable, this is not about doing something feel good. I mean, it is feel good. It's, it's good to do because it's a change in the way things operate. But at the same time, it's important that it be binding and enforceable. And there's a range of different ways that municipalities do that. Some have adopted it as an ordinance. So like Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania adopted it as a regular ordinance and then placed it into the municipal code. Other places have driven it either into their tribal constitutions, so their local constitutions, or into the municipal charters, which we see akin to municipal constitutions. But as a law, not within a general plan, not within a land use plan, not within a comprehensive plan, not within any plans that generally are not legally enforceable or binding, but within a standalone segment recognizing citizen standing to enforce these rights, and also codifies the standards within a binding and enforceable system of law.
Okay, thank you.
Betsy Hall?
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's wonderful to see this work going forward. Could you please send the PowerPoint to someone here so that we can all have a chance to look at it, at a longer period of time, for a longer period of time?
Yes, we can send it to Frank, and then he can circulate it out to others. We also have I gave you the short, less painful version. The 2.5-hour one, which we do is continuing legal education credits for the National Association for Continuing Legal Education, is also up on our webpage. So if people really want the down and dirty 2.5-hour one, it's also available for free from our webpage. So I can send that link to Frank as well as the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
So if we were going to want to put something in our charter with respect to this particular subject matter, what form would it take? Is it a statement of principle? Would it actually have some sort of enforcement mechanism? Would it actually try to confer standing on someone to assert this particular right of nature? I mean, how would one go about it right specifically here in Plymouth?
So we already helped Frank and the Pine Barrens group draft a template. I think in the last presentation that Frank gave, he included that template. It's a 2-pager, and those provisions within that 2-page would be inserted into the Plymouth charter. The question is where to place it. And when that's been asked of us previously, we usually look for a natural resources section, even though I hate the phrase natural resources, or other environmental section. If that doesn't exist, sometimes we move all the way up to Article 1 and put in a civil rights section or a rights of nature section, and then dump those provisions in. In Pittsburgh, again, the parallel, I think, was under the environmental protection section of the charter and the environmental protection section of the code. But the one we drafted for the Pine Barrens, which is the one I think that Frank included in his first presentation, dealt specifically with those 3 elements. The rights themselves, codifying them. Second, how would they be enforced and who has standing to enforce them? And finally, what the remedy would be in terms of a successful legal action that would be brought.
So Frank, I guess as a matter of follow-up, would you be able to get whatever written materials we need
Yes.
to pursue this if we choose to? Yep. Two questions, just 2 final questions I had. One was that Pittsburgh case that you talked about and the standing, and who ended up having the standing to assert those particular rights that were being violated in that case, and what court was that brought in?
So the Pittsburgh case was not one of enforcement. The city council adopted in 2010 the current rights of nature provisions, both in their code and in their charter. And the fracking companies pulled out from the city in response to the law and the charter provision that the city council had adopted. But that was adopted unanimously by the entire city council of the city of Pittsburgh. Again, mostly in response to hydrofracking threatening the major tributaries of the 3 rivers that flow through the city of Pittsburgh.
In the Sierra Club Supreme Court case, this 1972 case, is that the one where Justice Douglas dissented? Has that been cited since, if you shepherdize the case?
Yes, quite a bit. In fact, I think it's on the top 10 list of cases that have been cited within both law review articles and within court cases at the appellate level. I know the number 1 case is Brennan's law review article about federalism and about states having the ability to pass greater civil rights protections than the federal government. One way to look at this work is that this creates a heightened environmental protection standard, and that localities or municipalities should have the authority to pass heightened standards above that provided by the state or federal government. So kind of the same approach, except in the direction of ecosystems and nature rather than expansion of civil rights at the state level vis-a-vis the federal.
Anybody have any further questions? Let me just ask one final question. This is the final question. What have any of the U.S. national environmental organizations picked up this particular area and are pushing it as part of their own agenda? Is the Sierra Club, for example, have they adopted it, or the Nature Conservancy, or any of the large environmental organizations that are pursuing various rights in the environmental area?
By and large, they have not. And that's mostly because those environmental groups tend to work more in the area of perfecting regulatory environmental stuff, experts and permit issues and those types of things. What you'll find is county chapters of the Sierra Club in different places will support rights of nature provisions. Oliver Hauk, who's a leading environmental law professor at Tulane University Law School, just came out with a law review article supporting rights of nature. He actually wrote the Clean Water Act, or big chunks of the federal Clean Water Act, many years ago. And I think you see rights of nature moving more towards the mainstream. The Florida Democratic Party actually put rights of nature into their platform this past year. There's also been 3 law schools that have held symposia to discuss rights of nature concepts. And so I think it's moving closer and closer to the mainstream from being on the edge, but it's still a little too out there for some of the major environmental national organizations, other than groups like the Riverkeeper. You know, there are a bunch of river keepers of National Waterkeeper Association now embracing rights of nature concepts. But in terms of the big green groups, very few of those organizations organizationally have embraced the concept at this point.
Well, on behalf of the commission, thank you very, very much, Mr. Lindsay, for opening our eyes to this. It seems absolutely something that is moving ahead, and you know, certainly to be congratulated on what you're doing here to pursue this. I mean, I'm absolutely going to read your materials and see if there's a way that makes some sense for us here. We thank you for spending some time with us tonight, and I look forward to
Sounds
seeing
good.
the materials. Michelle, will you be able to coordinate with Mr. Lindsay to get copies of these items that he's shown us tonight? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for carving out the time.
Right, thank you. Michelle, I think we're to the point in our agenda for public comment. Is there anybody wishing to speak?
Michelle, if you're going to be speaking, can you turn your mic?
Okay.
No hands are raised right now.
Pardon me?
No hands are raised right now for public comment.
Nobody for public comment. Okay, just to return to what we were talking about before we had our guest, was the Finance Committee, and I just was going to say that if you look in the charter at Section 12, which is the Advisory and Finance Committee, it's a couple of pages. So there isn't a lot there to mark up, but it's enough to get us started. And I think we should really start putting pen to paper, and by the next session, each of us will have marked that up. We'll have a draft of something on the Committee of Precinct Chairs. So we'll be moving forward with specific language, which I think is important. But on the Advisory and Finance Committee, it also occurs to me that some of their functions is established by bylaw, so we better pull out the bylaws and look at them too, because I remember there's a back and forth between what's in the charter and what's in the bylaw as to how the Finance Committee operates. So you've got to keep both in mind as we address the charter.
Yeah, we definitely, you know, between the bylaws and the charter itself, when it comes to the FinCom, there needs to be clarification. And I do recall when Lynn was in here, the Director of Finance, she did indicate to us that there were aspects of the charter that were not being enforced, and we needed to go back and revisit that with Lynn to find out what exactly should stay and what should go.
One other aspect we didn't talk about tonight, but it's going to come up, is what the Finance Committee's, and this has come up before, that it only should be advising on finance articles. I mean, there's the budget articles, and then there's the other articles that involve money, so those are finance articles. But several years ago, when the Committee of Precinct Chairs was first formed, it put forth an article in town meeting so that the Committee of Precinct Chairs would advise on the non-finance articles at town meeting. But it was a bit too much at the time, because there's so many new things coming into effect that was not adopted. But I think we want to revisit that. And you saw how many other charters we looked at where the Finance Committee keeps its business on finance articles and doesn't try to advise the towns on other matters that have nothing to do with finances.
I know we talked about that a number of times earlier this year, so I think we need to focus our attention on how we see that moving forward. I agree.
So moving ahead with the agenda, the minutes for the March 7th meeting were sent out, but they're 12 pages and extremely carefully, I think, very well-written minutes. I think it probably would be too soon to try to approve them tonight until we've had a chance to really read them and make any corrections. If you already have some corrections, you can give them to Michelle. And otherwise, I suggest we wait until approve the minutes at our next meeting.
We will get behind, so we should plan to approve minutes from tonight as well as the last meeting, I think, at the next meeting. Because the minutes are all so detailed and so
Say again?
great. The minutes are great, and they're very detailed, so we don't want to get too far behind with the minutes either.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of work into what you did between last week and this week. Thank you, Michelle.
And I think I will definitely send you my comments, Michelle, and maybe, Bill, if you send Michelle your comments and Larry does, that we made at the beginning, then she could just,
Yeah, I
Put
think the
those right in.
statements that were made at the beginning should be put into the record
yeah, and we can just mail her our comments.
as part of the records of this commission.
Did you hear them? So they were saying that the statements that were read into the record, they'll provide you with them.
Right. Okay, is there any old business to be brought up before the commission?
I would just like to make one statement about
see.
advisory and finance. Thank you, Bill, that came up tonight. And that is, it would be very helpful to town meeting members, I think, and it's never happened. People have talked to us about unfunded liabilities, but it's always been sort of a concept, but nothing specific. I think it would be helpful for advisory and finance to tell town meeting, if we continue on the path we are with the number of employees we have right now and the typical capital expenditures, here's what town meeting budget will be in 2028. And here's what it'll be in 2033, so a 5-year and a 10-year. So people can actually see the number that in 2028, 5 years from now, or 2027, it will be 3,492,000. I mean, I don't know what it'll be, but, so the town meeting really can see actual figures. And that would be part of this priorities committee, would be bringing that to town meeting. But for now, maybe we could ask, even for this annual town meeting in April, if they could bring us a figure. Now, we know it's not the correct absolute figure, but a general figure based on inflation, based on the number of employees. Or maybe we could ask Lynn Barrett, what would be a general amount of money that we could expect our budget to be 5 years from now?
Actually, Betsy, there's been a lot of discussion in the run-up to this town meeting that's in 2 weeks on that exact subject of looking at an expenditure today to see how it actually will change 5 years from now, the budget. Looking at more than just 1 year. And there's been a number of emails about this topic. We're going to discuss it at our caucus on Wednesday night. Being able to take more than a single year snapshot when we look at a budget item for 2022. What's the effect in 2025 and so forth? I think that really seems to be, time has come for that. Larry?
Bill, our next meeting is scheduled for
The 4th of
the
April.
4th of April.
Right.
Should town meeting unexpectedly not finish its business on Saturday, and I know they have traditionally, but then there were times when they didn't, do we have a fallback, since I assume we won't meet if town meeting is meeting at that time?
April was a tough month because, let's see, the 18th, the 18th is the holiday. That's Monday, the 18th, would be 2 weeks from the 4th, but that's Patriots' Day. And that's the day after Easter, so that doesn't seem to be a good day. We didn't really look at it at the 11th, but that would be pretty tight with the 4th, and we are meeting on the 25th, so we're going to meet in April on the 4th and the 25th. Michelle, is there any other date that we could identify that wasn't busy?
No, the 11th might be open. You
Okay,
know.
I was just suggesting that, just in case,
Just to have a backup date?
That if the 4th isn't going to work for us, that we have the 11th as an alternative.
I'll have to check the room availability.
It's probably a good idea, because it's a busy time for us, so I think Larry's idea is a good idea. We'll try to sign up to the 11th as a backup. Right, good. Any other old business? Any new business? So it appears that our business is over then for tonight. So a motion to adjourn is, Mr. Pizer moves to adjourn. Oh,
I didn't catch
Scott.
a new business. I'm probably not going to be here on the 4th. I have a work conflict, so I just figured I'd let you know.
Okay. Thank you. So a motion's been made to adjourn, was that seconded? All in
Before we
favor?
adjourn?
Yes, Betsy.
As far as the next meeting, we are to bring with us our ideas of how advisory and finance could be improved. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, right.
Are we also doing COPC on the same?
Well, I was
at
going
the
to try
same
to
time?
say there's going to be two things that night. We do the homework on the Advisory and Finance Committee and mark it up and be ready to discuss it. And that I was going to try to actually prepare a draft on the COPC part.
I see.
If
And
anyone else wants to assist in the drafting, please join me.
as long as no one comments or does any emailing around, is it permissible through the open meeting law for people to send their ideas on advisory and finance before the meeting? I know Scott said he couldn't be here, but I'd like to know what his thoughts are on that. So is he able to send his thoughts on that before the meeting?
Well, I mean, certainly, Larry, let's discuss that. If one of us drafts something, right, in between now and the next meeting, we can certainly send it to the members between now and the next meeting. The only thing we can't do is engage in a discussion of
Sure,
it.
right, okay. So
Right.
Scott could send his, or if I'm all done a few days before, I can send mine so other people can just have a look at it, as long as nobody comments on it. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yes. Yes, you can, yes, yep. Any other discussion before we vote on the motion to adjourn? All in favor of adjourning? Thank you. Thank you very much. We will be back in this room on April 4th. Thank you.